following your intervention. Right, we're now coming to the statement. I now call the Deputy Prime Minister, Right Honourable Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will make a statement about malicious cyber activity targeting the United Kingdom by actors that we assess are affiliated to the Chinese state. I want to update the House on our assessment of this activity, and I want to reassure the House on the steps that the government has taken to shore up our resilience and to hold those actors to account. I know that honourable and right honourable members on both sides of this chamber will recognise the seriousness of this issue, particularly in a year when so many democratic elections will be taking place around the world. Members will want to be reassured that the government is taking steps to address the associated threat. I can confirm today that Chinese state-affiliated actors were responsible for 2 malicious cyber campaigns targeting both our democratic institutions and parliamentarians. First, the compromise of the United Kingdom Electoral Commission between 2021 and 2022, which was announced last summer. And second, attempted reconnaissance activity against UK parliamentary accounts in a separate campaign in 2021. Later today, a number of our international partners, including the United States, will be issuing similar statements to expose this activity and to hold China to account for the ongoing patterns of hostile activity targeting our collective democracies. Mr. Speaker, you and Parliamentary Security have already been briefed on this activity. We want now to be as open as possible with the House and with the British public, because part of our defence is calling out this behaviour. This is the latest in a clear pattern of hostile activity originating in China, including the targeting of democratic institutions and parliamentarians in the United Kingdom and beyond. We have seen this in China's continued disregard for universal human rights and international commitments in Xinjiang, China's erasure of dissenting voices and stifling of the opposition under the new national security law in Hong Kong, and the disturbing reports of Chinese intimidation and aggressive behaviour in the South China Sea. It is why this government has investigated and called out so-called Chinese overseas police service stations and instructed the Chinese embassy to close them. However, their cumulative attempts to interfere with the United Kingdom's democracy have not succeeded. Last summer, the Electoral Commission stated that it had been a victim of a complex cyber attack between 2021 and 2022. This was the work of Chinese state-affiliated actors. These actors gained access to the Electoral Commission's email and file-sharing systems, which contain copies of the electoral register. As the Electoral Commission stated in 2023, when this attack was first made public, the compromise has not affected the security of elections. It will not impact how people register, vote, or otherwise participate in democratic processes. I want to reassure people that the compromise of this information, whilst it is obviously concerning, typically does not create a risk to those affected. And I want to further reassure the House that the Commission has worked with security specialists to investigate the incident and remove the threat from their systems. The Commission has since taken further steps to increase the resilience of their systems. In addition, the National Cybersecurity Centre assesses it is almost certain that the Chinese state-affiliated cyber actor known as APT-31 attempted to conduct reconnaissance activity against UK parliamentary accounts during a separate campaign in 2021. Honourable members may recall that APT-31 was one of several cyber actors attributed to the Chinese Ministry of State Security by the United Kingdom and its allies in July 2021. This email campaign by APT-31 was blocked by Parliament's cyber security measures. In this case, it was entirely unsuccessful. However, any targeting of members of this House by foreign state actors is completely unacceptable. Taken together, the United Kingdom judges that these actions demonstrate a clear and persistent pattern of behaviour that signals hostile intent from China. That is why the United Kingdom has today sanctioned 2 individuals and 1 entity associated with the Chinese state-affiliated APT-31 group for involvement in malicious cyber activity targeting officials, government entities and parliamentarians around the world. We are today acting to warn of the breadth of targeting emanating from Chinese state-affiliated actors like APT-31, to sanction those actors who attempt to threaten our democratic institutions, and to deter both China and all those who seek to do the same. Mr. Speaker, last week at the Summit for Democracy in Seoul, I said that we would call out malicious attempts to undermine our democracy wherever we find them. This is an important tool in our armoury, and today we are doing just that. The UK does not accept that China's relationship with the United Kingdom is set on a predetermined course, but this depends on the choices that China makes. That is why the Foreign Office will be summoning the Chinese ambassador to account for China's conduct in these incidents. The UK's policy towards China is anchored in our core national interests. Where it is consistent with these interests, we will engage with the Chinese government. But we will not hesitate to take swift and robust actions wherever the Chinese government threatens the United Kingdom's interests. We have done so today and previously. This government will continue to hold China and other state actors accountable for their actions. We will also take serious action to prevent this behaviour from affecting our security. The steps we have taken in recent years have made the UK a harder operating environment for foreign state actors seeking to target our values and our institutions. Through the National Security Act, we now have for the first time a specific offence of foreign interference. This new offence will allow law enforcement to disrupt state-linked efforts to undermine our institutions, rights or political system. Our National Security and Investment Act has overhauled our scrutiny of investment into the United Kingdom by giving the government powers to block, unwind or put conditions on investments that could create national security risks. We've significantly reduced China's involvement in the UK's civil nuclear sector, taking ownership of CGN's stake in Sizewell C nuclear power project and ensuring Chinese state-owned nuclear energy corporations will have no further role in the project. We have put in place measures to prevent hostile infiltration of our universities, including protecting campuses from interference through the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. The Procurement Act includes national security debarment provisions that allow us to act where we see malicious influence in our public procurement. I have taken steps to reduce the government's exposure to Chinese operators, banning Hikvision and TikTok from government buildings and devices. And through the National Cyber Security Strategy, we're investing £2.6 billion to increase the cyber resilience of our critical national infrastructure by 2025, making the most important parts of our digital environment a harder target for state and non-state actors. The government is continuing to build the tools, expertise and knowledge to respond to the systemic challenge that China poses to the United Kingdom's security and its values. The integrated review refresh in 2023 took steps towards this, doubling funding for a government-wide programme, including investment in Mandarin language training and deepening diplomatic expertise. But we must also be clear that this is not a problem for the government to solve alone. That is why we created the National Protective Security Authority within MI5 to help businesses and institutions play their part in protecting our security and prosperity. The NPSA will help organisations in the UK's most sensitive fields, including critical national infrastructure operators and world-leading science and tech sectors, to protect themselves against state threats. It's also why I set up the Economic Security Public-Private Forum to ensure that business leaders in crucial sectors understand the threat to the UK and what they can do to defeat it. And in Parliament, the National Cyber Security Centre has launched an opt-in service for members of both houses. This allows the NCSC to alert high-risk individuals if they identify evidence of malicious activity on their personal devices or account, and swiftly advise them on steps to take to protect their information. Today, the NCSC has published new guidance for political organisations, including political parties and think tanks, which will help these organisations take effective action to protect their systems and their data. The NCSC is also working with all political parties to increase the uptake of their active cyber defence services in the lead-up to a general election. A key component of increasing our resilience is supporting the NCSC and parliamentary authorities by taking up this cyber security offer. And so I urge all members of this House to do so, and I will be writing to colleagues later today, setting out again the steps that they can take to do so. At the Summit for Democracy, I was struck by the powerful strength of our collective voices when we work together to defend our democratic freedoms. The summit provided the United Kingdom government with a platform to build international agreement on a new global government compact on countering deceptive use of AI by foreign states in elections. It's important and welcome that our partners across the Five Eyes, as well as those in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, are also standing in solidarity with our efforts to call out malicious cyber activity. I would also like to pay tribute to the dedicated public servants whose painstaking work has continued to expose the reality of the threat we face. Mr. Speaker, our political processes and institutions have not been harmed by these attacks. The government will continue to call out and condemn this kind of activity in the strongest terms. We will continue to work with our allies to ensure that Chinese state-affiliated actors suffer the consequences of their behaviour, and we will take preventative action to ensure these attempts do not succeed. The cyber threat posed by China-affiliated actors is real and it is serious, but it is more than equalled by our determination and resolve to resist it. That is how we defend ourselves and our precious democracy, and I commend this statement to the House.
Can I just say it was an important statement. That's why it has run on quite a lot longer than the normal 10 minutes. So in which case, I'm sure everybody agrees that if the two front benches need a little extra time, of course we'll be flexible exactly in the same way. I now come to the Shadow Secretary, Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement and for advance sight of it. It is, of course, a statement about which there's been significant briefing in the press over the past couple of days. Now, on questions of national security, we will support the government in efforts to counter attempts by China or any other state to interfere with or undermine the democratic process, or attempts to stop elected representatives going about their business, voicing their opinions or casting their votes without fear or favour. And with that in mind, can I pay tribute to the efforts made every day by the intelligence and security services to protect the public, to protect our democracy and our way of life. The economic relationship between the United Kingdom and China can never mean compromising on national security or our democratic integrity. Now, the Deputy Prime Minister's statement touches on a number of issues, and I'd like to ask him some questions about these. Could he say more about the government's assessment of Chinese motives? Does he, for example, believe that Beijing does want to disrupt our democratic process, or instead to gather data about our citizens for some other reason? On the specific issue of the Electoral Commission and the Electoral Register, why does the Deputy Prime Minister think that the Chinese government hacked what is a publicly available database? Does he believe that they were after details of those who may not be on the public register for very good reasons, because, for example, they might be employed in security-sensitive areas? Does he believe they were after details of political donors and their personal data, or for some other motive? Now, he referred to the democratic electoral process, and with an election coming, it is, of course, vital that people have confidence in their ability to register and to vote. Can he confirm that the electronic register to vote system that we have is sufficiently well protected? In terms of attacks on parliamentary accounts, the Secretary of State said that the attacks were unsuccessful, but does he believe that China now wants to engage in the kind of hack and leak activity that we have in recent years associated with Russia in order to compromise either individual politicians or the wider democratic process? On the issue of sanctions, only last week the Minister of State was reluctant to respond to the claim that the Foreign Office had indefinitely paused targeted sanctions against Chinese officials late last year. Can the Deputy Prime Minister explain what has changed just in the past week? Now, Mr. Speaker, we are very grateful for the work of the Intelligence and Security Committee and the report they issued on China last year, which covered much of the same ground as the Deputy Prime Minister has covered in his statement today. Paragraph 98 of that report, when discussing individual politicians, said the following, and I quote, "Targets are not limited to serving politicians either. They can include former political figures if they are sufficiently high profile. For example, it is possible that David Cameron's role as Vice President of a £1 billion China-UK investment fund was in some part engineered by the Chinese state to lend credibility to Chinese investment." Close quote. What has the government done to look into this allegation from the Intelligence and Security Committee? How can ministers ensure that those leaving politics are not targeted in the way that the committee discussed? And in that spirit, Mr. Speaker, I've read reports that the Conservative backbench 1922 committee is to be briefed on these matters later today. Given the importance of national and democratic security to all the parties in this House, is the Deputy Prime Minister intending to arrange a briefing for the Leader of the Opposition, the Intelligence and Security Committee, or indeed the other political parties represented in this House? Experts in this field have warned of China's voracious appetite for data and the potential uses of this as computing power improves, for example, as quantum computing develops. Now, the UK's record on data security is patchy, to put it mildly. What is the government doing to protect complex and valuable data sets from being stolen now, possibly in order to be manipulated later by more powerful computers that are controlled by authoritarian adversaries? And finally, Mr. Speaker, on the broader issue, does the fact that the Deputy Prime Minister chose to make this statement today signal a fundamental reassessment of the overall threat? He referred to the United States and our allies. On the 12th of February, the United States administration warned Congress that the cyber threat from China was changing. Previously, a threat that largely involved spying and influencing now looked like it was getting ready to disrupt critical American infrastructure, aviation, energy, healthcare, and other sectors. Is it now the UK's government view that we should change our assessment of the threat in a similar way? If so, this is of the utmost importance, and we would need to know what corresponding improvements the government would make to the preparedness of our critical infrastructure. Because if the threat really has changed, then so too should our response.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions. I'll seek to address as many of them as I can. When it comes to Chinese motivations, ultimately it's a matter for the Chinese to be able to justify their motivations. I think the points he made are both apposite. First of all, I think that the Chinese look at successful democratic countries like the United Kingdom, or indeed Japan and the Republic of Korea, where I was last week, and they want to seek to undermine successful democratic countries. So it's no surprise that they should seek to interfere in electoral processes, just as you have seen conduct from Russia that aligns with that, and indeed the successful democratic elections we're having around the world right now stand in contrast with the sham elections that we saw in Russia last weekend. On the point about the public record of the Electoral Commission, I think that is the essence of what's happened here. These attacks and these attempts were ultimately pretty unsuccessful. And I would like to reassure the honourable gentleman and members of this House that there was no infiltration of the closed register of the Electoral Commission, so the concerns he raised have not arisen. In terms of further strengthening the electoral register, that's precisely the work that the National Cyber Security Centre does in coordination with GCHQ, working with government agencies, including the Electoral Commission. He's right to raise the risk of hack and leak. It's certainly something that we saw in previous elections. I remain concerned about hack and leak. I also remain very concerned about artificial intelligence being used to disrupt elections, particularly in relation to deep fakes, hence the work that I undertook at the conference last week and the progress we're making with this accord in relation to artificial intelligence use by malign states. In relation to targeted sanctions, it's not the case that the FCDO paused targeted sanctions. In relation to the conduct of the former the current Foreign Secretary who sits in the other place. All appointments are. I'm not sacking the Foreign Secretary from the dispatch box. They are subject to the usual propriety and ethic processes for any appointments to government. In relation to the 1922 committee, the Lord Cameron is addressing the 1922 committee in his capacity as Foreign Secretary in the usual way, addressing a wide range of issues. It's not a specific briefing on this, but if leaders of the principal opposition parties wish to have further briefing on this, of course, I'm very happy to facilitate that in the way that they will know I have done in relation to other national security related issues. In relation to the risks from hostile states hoovering up currently quantum encrypted information, which could then be decoded subsequently with advances in quantum computing, we are highly alert to this, and we do extensive work with the National Cyber Security Centre and with the Ministerial Cyber Board on critical national infrastructure to make sure we guard ourselves against exactly that risk. In terms of our relationship with China more broadly, I think members of this House should take this moment very seriously. It is a grave moment, and we will not. And it is against the backdrop of an escalating threat from China, and we will take proportionate action in response to that escalating threat.
Sir Iain Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow is 3 years since the parliamentarians were sanctioned and your defence, Mr. Speaker, of us has been remarkable. But what I will say is that whilst I welcome these two sanctions from the government, it is a little bit, this statement, like an elephant giving birth to a mouse. The reality is that in those 3 years, the Chinese have trashed the Sino-British Agreement. They have been committing murder and slave labour and genocide in Xinjiang. We have had churches broken and, in Hong Kong, false court cases against Jimmy Lai. So my question really is to my right honourable friend, why two? America has sanctioned over 40 people in Hong Kong. We have sanctioned none, and 3 lowly officials only in Xinjiang. Surely this means that the integrated review should now be changed. They are not an epoch-defining challenge, strange as that may be, but they are surely a threat, and can they now correct that so that we all know where we are with China?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his question, and his views are very well known to me, Mr. Speaker, and I genuinely welcome a constructive, at most times, debate that I have with the right honourable gentleman. That nobody should be in any doubt about the gravity of this matter. They're not the actions of a friendly state, and they do require our serious attentions. This, as has been described by the right honourable gentleman, is an escalating situation. The measures we've announced today are the first step, but the government will respond proportionately at all times in relation to the facts in front of it. But no one should be in any doubt about the government's determination to face down and deal with these threats to our national security from wherever they come.
Kirsty, Blackman, SNP spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement and for the advanced sight of it. During the statement, he said, "I have taken steps to reduce the government's exposure to Chinese operators, banning Hikvision and TikTok from government buildings and devices." But the reality is that the Hikvision ban only extends to sensitive sites, despite the fact that we have pushed him to try to ensure that it extends to all public buildings, because surely the majority of things that happen in government involve some sort of confidential information. Can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm whether he is extending this ban beyond sensitive sites to all government sites, as we have been calling for a number of years now? Mr. Speaker, these attacks referenced on the Electoral Commission and the parliamentarian accounts happened nearly 3 years ago. Will we be sitting here in 2027 hearing about an attack that's happening right now? Yes. The EU is currently delivering €214 million for cybersecurity to improve their collective resilience. Will the government deliver an equivalent fund for these islands? Without more action, Mr. Speaker, can the Deputy Prime Minister give us real assurances that the general election that's going to take place this year will take place without international interference?
Good question.
Well, in respect to the points the Honourable Lady raises, as she is aware, we currently ban Hikvision from, and indeed it's not just Hikvision, it's any Chinese technology in relation to in relation to CCTV. We continue to keep that under review. I don't rule out a further progression in the policy, but that's not the case right now. In terms of the time taken, and this is an important point, it's really essential that before government ministers stand at this dispatch box and make assertions attributing to a hostile state the conduct of this kind of activity, we are absolutely sure of the basis on which we do it. So that requires extensive work by our intelligence agencies, it requires fine judgments to be made, and it requires work to be done with our allies around the world, and you will see comments from the United States shortly after my statement. So I would rather we did this in the proper way. In relation to our investment, in fact, we have invested £2.6 billion during this spending review, £2.6 billion on cyber security. So I can never be totally confident in relation to cyber security. No government minister anywhere in the world can be. This is an environment in which the risks are escalating all the time. They're being turbocharged by artificial intelligence. But I can assure the Honourable Lady and other members of this House that we are constantly increasing our activity and our vigilance in the face of it.
Jim Loughton.
My right honourable friend for Chingford, I too am rather underwhelmed by this statement. In the 3 years since we've been sanctioned, we have been the 7 parliamentarians subject to intimidation, impersonation, hacking, as well as the families of exiles from China who we have associated with us. Today, the Minister has described hostile actors, malign acts towards the integrity of our electoral system and parliamentary democracy, foreign interference, and sanctioned 2 individuals and 1 entity, which is a company which employs 50 people with a turnover of £208,000. So does the Minister think that this is proportionate? And specifically, can the Minister confirm that the government will be putting the whole of the Chinese Communist government in the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme?
Well, in relation to the enhanced tier of the Foreign Interference Registration Scheme, the honourable gentleman may be aware that we are currently in the process of collective government agreement in relation to it. Clearly, the conduct I have described today will have a very strong bearing on the decision that we make in respect of it. In relation to the sanctions, it is worth noting this is the first time that the government has imposed sanctions in respect of cyber activity. I do believe these are proportionate and targeted, but they also sit in the context of actions that we have been taking with our international allies. They are a first step, and as the situation evolves, we remain totally open to taking further steps. It's clear the path we're going on with this.
My first reaction, Mr. Speaker, is that's it. Because the spin clearly didn't match this statement. The Deputy Prime Minister says that there's an issue around nuclear and higher education. Well, the reason for that is because the government encouraged China to actually invest in nuclear and cut the budgets of our universities, so they're reliant on Chinese students. He also ducked the question asked by my right honourable from the front bench about Lord Cameron. Will he now publish all the money and interactions he had with the Chinese entities when he was out of government? And he actually says he's committed to the security services. Can I ask him then why, that in the budget on the 6th of March, the security budget was cut by £600 million next year? That is not a sign of a government that's taken this issue very seriously.
Well, the Foreign Secretary has provided a full declaration of all of his interests. I will take with a pinch of salt from the benches opposite lectures on action in relation to security threats. It was this government that introduced the National Security Investment Act in 2021. It was this government that passed the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act in 2023. It's this government that has passed the National Security Act in 2023, none of which we saw from the party opposite during their years in office.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen reports of espionage on UK campus, aggression on UK soil, massive cyber attacks and hostile corporate takeovers. It's abundantly clear that China is a hostile state and poses an unprecedented threat to our national security. As Home Secretary, I oversaw the enactment of the National Security Act, which built the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme designed specifically to deal with these threats so that our authorities have the right powers to tackle them. Isn't there a compelling case for China to be listed on that register? And if not now, then when?
And by the way, I pay tribute to the Right Honourable lady for the work that she did, and she and I worked closely together on many of those things. There is a strong case for it. The Right Honourable lady will be aware of the process that we go through in determining that. It has to be agreed through a collective government agreement. On this point about the hostile state, though, I do disagree with the Right Honourable lady. It is not the case that any Five Eyes nation has designated China explicitly a hostile state. The language I have used in relation to China reflects the complex situation of the state of China, but I want colleagues to be in no doubt about the direction that government policy is taking, how gravely we take this, and the overall escalation of our stance on this.
Angela Edel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I too am quite surprised at the difference between what was briefed and some of the information that the Deputy Prime Minister has given us today and the action and the sum of the action. He said that the government had taken rapid and robust action when he was talking about things that happened 3 and 4 years ago, and the sanctioning of 2 individuals in a minor company doesn't seem to be the definition of robust to me. How does he think that taking such tiny steps will actually deter the Chinese from carrying on in the same way as they have been doing, which has been very clear from the China report that the ISC was finally allowed to publish late? How will these tiny steps that he's announced today actually deter the Chinese from continuing in exactly the same way as he's outlined?
Well, first of all, in relation to briefings, I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure members of this House that there's been no briefing whatsoever from me or from my department in respect to this. I can categorically assure you. So, but as ever, I would say, don't believe everything that you read in the newspapers. Now, in relation to the overall direction of government policy, it is clearly set. It is not just the case of offensive action, but it's a case of the extensive defensive action we've taken to continuously increase the security of our government systems. I make no apology for the time we have taken to properly call out China in respect to this. I want to make sure that when I stand here at the dispatch box, I'm able to do so on a solid basis, painstakingly put together by our allies and by our security agencies.
Who should we go? Former Attorney General, no less. Sir Michael Evans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The front page of the Telegraph today reports Whitehall sources saying that China, Russia and Iran are even fuelling disinformation about the Princess of Wales to destabilise the nation. Now, hostile states with leaders who fake their own elections and are hated by their own people are spreading wild conspiracy theories about the royal family, amongst many other things, our royal family, which is hugely popular and much loved. Now, would the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that British people will obviously ignore this grotesque disinformation, despite the pathetic attempts of those autocratic regimes?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for raising this issue, and I would like to begin by extending my best wishes to members of the royal family at this very difficult time. The appalling speculation that we have seen over the past few weeks comes as a reminder to us all that it's important for us to ensure that we deal with valid and trusted information and that we are appropriately sceptical about many online sources.
Stuart M. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As one of the parliamentarians targeted, can I thank the security officials for the work they did to repel this attack? I'm glad it wasn't successful. But I have to say, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister has turned up at a gunfight with a wooden spoon. The attack that he stood at the dispatch box and announced happened 3 years ago, but he comes to the House and calls it swift. He comes to the House and says he's taken robust action, but as my honourable friend mentioned earlier, the entity he's sanctioned has fewer than 50 employees and a turnover of £200,000 a year. He hasn't sanctioned a single Chinese state official. He hasn't even told the House whether or not the Chinese ambassador has been summoned after what he's come to the dispatch box to tell us today. Oh, forgive me, he says he has been summoned. My apologies. But can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister, or rather press the Deputy Prime Minister, on the enhanced tier for the foreign influence registration scheme? What possible good excuse could there be for not having China in that? And isn't it the case that if we don't take more robust action and see a proper sea change in government thinking, rather than this tinkering around the edges, this will happen more and more and get worse and worse?
Well, I think everything about the honourable gentleman's question suggests that he didn't actually listen to the statement I made. I said that there had been a démarche, and that's exactly what's happening. I've already set out the position in relation to the foreign registration system.
Greg Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister knows that cyber attacks on UK institutions come from a wide range of actors, states and criminals, as we saw in the recent big attack on the British Library. It's important that our laws are up to date to protect against this. Now, in 2022, the Government announced that it would update the Network and Information Systems Regulations 2018 to, and I quote, protect essential and digital services against increasingly sophisticated and frequent cyber attacks, both now and in the future. In 2022, it was to be done as soon as parliamentary time allowed. Why has it not been done, and when will it be?
Well, the work is pretty much complete, and as soon as parliamentary time allows, we'll be bringing forward those measures.
Sir Christopher Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry, I found the Deputy Prime Minister today utterly unconvincing. The idea that SWIFT means taking 3 years to publish something which has already been published by a committee of this House is utterly preposterous. It means that if there were an attempt this year, we would hear about it long after the general election and possibly after another general election after that. The truth is, if he actually thinks that this is the sum total of all the Chinese states' attempts to disrupt the British democratic system, he's willfully blind and is therefore dangerous. There are two things, you know, that the government could do immediately to enhance confidence in this area. First of all, is bring forward the motion to allow the Foreign Secretary to answer questions in this House from members of the House of Commons, and secondly, publish the full, unexpurgated Russia report.
Well, I'm sorry that you're not happy with the right honourable gentleman sitting to my right-hand side. I think he does an excellent job of answering questions to this House. In relation to the time that it is taken, there is a difference between acknowledging, as the Electoral Commission did, the fact that the attack had taken place, and the process of attribution, which takes a longer period of time for the reasons I've set out repeatedly from this dispatch box.
Sir Alex Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to have the British Library in my constituency at Boston Spa, and Thorpe Arch, and I will be meeting with them in a week's time to talk about the cyber attack. And that's just one aspect which has happened very recently. But we're talking about the protection of democracy as well, and it does concern me at the time frames in which we're moving on some issues. One of the big concerns is going to be deep fake news profiles, people alleged to have been saying things, videos of people alleged to be doing things at the next election. And I urge my right honourable friend to work now to try and establish procedures that everybody across this House on all sides will be able to call out efficiently fake news that may be used to try and influence the election, because, as my honourable friend said earlier, you've got to be careful what you believe, but what can people believe in unless there are robust systems to call out what is absolutely fake?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue. We are doing work with tech companies in relation to, for example, watermarking of images to make sure that people have a sense of whether they're real or not. It can't just, though, be action from the UK government. We have to work internationally, which is why at the Global Summit for Democracy, we launched this Global Government Compact on countering deceptive use of AI by foreign states in elections. That's the United Kingdom leading across nations around the world to make sure we can act in coordination to address it. Moreover, it is also the case that everyone in this rapidly evolving technological world needs to be mindful of information that they see. And it cannot be trusted in the way it might have been able to be trusted just a few years ago.
Richard Ford.
Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister has talked in his statement this afternoon about the powerful strength of our collective voices. If we contrast the sanctions that have been announced this afternoon with those that followed the Novichok poisoning in 2018, on that occasion 130 Russian diplomats were expelled from over 25 countries, and the EU ambassador to Moscow was withdrawn. What steps is the government taking to seek to coordinate a robust response to this alleged attack on democracy by working with our democratic allies?
Well, that's exactly what we're doing. I raised it with opposite numbers in both Japan and Korea when I was there. I've raised it with the United States. The United States will with whom we have been coordinating exceptionally closely, will be shortly, if not currently, making a statement in relation to their actions. This is precisely why we've proceeded in this way, to make sure that we don't just act alone, we act with like-minded states. I would say not just, what's interesting, it's not just in relation to Five Eyes, it's in relation to European partners and international partners, particularly in the Asia-Pacific. It requires this kind of coordinated action, and this is at a time when our democratic institutions, not just here but around the world, are under increased threat. So it's important that those democratic nations work together in concert, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Mark Pritchard.
Can I join the Deputy Prime Minister in paying tribute to all those that do so much in the UK intelligence community? Would you join me in reassuring the shadow front bench that the Lord Cameron in another place actually oversees GCHQ right now and SIS, and is probably in a good place to know what's going on? There's been reference to the China report published. I was one of the co-authors of one or two others in this chamber in July 2023. And in that report, on page 198, it talked about the UK security services facing, quote, a formidable challenge, end quote. Can I welcome the fact that the government has played catch-up? That was another criticism, that the government was playing catch-up. It has caught up to a certain extent, and particularly welcome, over the last 3 years, £2.6 billion going to cyber protection for our critical national infrastructure.
Let's just say we're going to finish, because fairness to the Deputy Prime Minister, he wants to finish early because of other things that are happening around the world. If he's happy to continue, I'm happy to keep. In which case, let's carry on. Come on forward.
Forgive me, I think I'm sure I will regret saying that, Mr. Speaker, but I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to pay tribute to our intelligence agencies, and I see it firsthand, day in, day out. We are one of a very small number of countries around the world that actually have intelligence agencies of this standard. It enables us all to be more secure.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the tone of vigilance. A stark contrast to the nonchalance shown by the Johnson government over Russian interference earlier in our elections and the Brexit referendum. But why should we believe the government's honest intentions when they still haven't implemented all the recommendations of the Russia report?
Well, I think the right honourable gentleman would have seen from the conduct of the government, for example, just a few months ago, the further sanctions that we imposed on Russia. We have not hesitated in taking robust action in relation to Russia, just as we will continue to do in relation to any threats from China.
Richard Drax.
Speaker, bearing in mind all that my right honourable friend has said, he may be concerned to hear what we've heard in the Defence Committee, and that is that English MOD companies are having a nightmare to employ those with AI speciality skills from university because they're all Chinese. Is my right honourable friend aware of this, and what's he going to do to counter this potential threat to our security?
Well, clearly anyone employed by a relevant defence company or in UK government will be subject to advanced vetting that would likely preclude a number of the individuals that he's described. The main thing we've got to do is increase our skills in this country, which is why we're investing in science, technology, engineering and maths. I would say, though, we are very, very fortunate, and wherever I go in the world, people look with envy on the fact that we have 3 or 4 of the top 10 universities in the world in the United Kingdom. That is a base upon which both our intelligence agencies and industry can draw.
Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We really must ask the question that these are cyber attacks that occurred in 2021 and 2022. How has it taken the government so long to come with this statement today? And when we reflect on what the Deputy Prime Minister said, and I quote, "These actors gained access to the Electoral Commission's email and file sharing system, which contained copies of the electoral register." Mr. Speaker, this is an election year. It should put fear into the hearts of all of us that the Chinese, at a time like this, have got access to the UK electoral register, when we're already worried about bad actors, about cyber attacks taking place, about the use of AI. And when the government, the Deputy Prime Minister talks about taking robust action, good grief, 2 individuals being sanctioned. Reference has been made to what happened after Novichok, and we swiftly took action to expel diplomats from this country and around the world. I hope that when the Chinese ambassador meets with the Deputy Prime Minister, he will be told that diplomats will be getting expelled. And will the Deputy Prime Minister come back to this House tomorrow and tell us about the robust action that he should be taking?
You shouting with robustness.
Well, I think I'll answer my question in a slightly less aggressive way than the question was put. But I'll make my point in my own way. First of all, in relation to the Electoral Commission, as the Electoral Commission said in its statement, the data contained in the electoral register is limited, and much of it is already in the public domain. The Electoral Commission had already declared the fact of the attack. What is different today is we are, contrary indeed to some of the speculation at the time, we are announcing that it was in relation to Chinese-related actors. That's what's changed. In relation to our overall approach, I've set out a direction. These are grave threats that we take seriously. We are taking proportionate action now, and we will continue to take steps as required.
Sir Desmond Swain.
A successful deterrent requires, first, the capability, and second, the will to retaliate. Have we got either?
Yes, we do on both fronts, and he will be, the Honourable Gentleman will be well aware, my Honourable Friend will be well aware of our Cyber Defence Force, but I do not comment on the conduct of that from the dispatch box.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January 2023, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, prior to his appointment as Foreign Secretary, of course, went to Sri Lanka in order to drum up investment for Port City, Colombo, a Belt and Road project that was launched by President Xi and which many believe will become a military base for the Chinese Navy. Following his appointment as Foreign Secretary, many FOI requests have been submitted to the FCDO in order to try and shed some light on Lord Cameron's visit to Sri Lanka. Who did he meet? What kind of conversations took place? To date, not a single one of those FOI requests has been complied with by the FCDO. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that this is a matter of the highest public interest, that sunlight is the best form of disinfectant, and therefore that the FCDO should comply with those FOI requests as a matter of urgency?
Well, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office always deals with FOI requests in the proper way. I have to say that this is pretty desperate stuff, trying to link Chinese cyber attacks to our current Foreign Secretary. It just doesn't wash.
Absolutely right that we call out these malicious actions, otherwise they will become normalised. Would the Deputy Prime Minister agree that when it comes to our security, indeed our economic interests as well, there's an important parity between the digital space and indeed our traditional physical terrain, and that should be reflected in defence spending? Would he also agree that Beijing is no doubt watching today's events and will no doubt retaliate? Should we brace ourselves for further individual sanctions against British personnel?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. First of all, to highlight the need for investment in this. That's precisely why in the last spending review period we put in £2.6 billion in relation to our wider cyber defences. What I would say is, in respect of any retaliatory action by Beijing, I'm absolutely confident that we will be able to deal with those very effectively.
Alison Pulis.
Mr Deputy Speaker, it's in various areas of government that we should be worried about Chinese influence. Graham Barrow, the Companies House expert, has been warning for quite some time about dubious company and corporations which have originated in China. He believes that they are being created using an algorithm, and there's evidence that companies are being incorporated using stolen UK credentials, streets at a time. So can I ask the Minister, what conversations has he had with Companies House, and would he be willing to meet with Graham Barrow to hear his conclusions on this? Hear.
Well, I or another minister would be very happy to meet with him. that's precisely why we set up the National Cyber Security Centre. The National Cyber Security Centre takes GCHQ expertise, which informs our approach to cyber and allows the NCSC to engage with businesses and with individuals. And again, around the world, this is a renowned and admired approach. The fact that we can give this high-quality advice through the National Cyber Security Centre, and week after week I get delegations coming in from around the world to see what we've done with the National Cyber Security Centre.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The £2.6 billion in additional money to counter cyber threats is very welcome, but of course this field is one that is constantly evolving and those that wish us harm innovating further. So whilst I accept my right honourable friend won't comment on the exact detail, can he at least assure the House that that £2.6 billion outguns what those who wish us harm are spending on new threats?
Well, I think the amount of spending that we have compares extremely favourably with similar countries around the world, G7 countries. I'm confident that we have world-leading expertise and that we are constantly evolving our capabilities in this space.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement and also for his answers? I had occasion just over a month or 5 weeks ago to go and see Mr Speaker in relation to an incident that took place, and I want to quote it as well. The Minister may be aware, and if not, he'll be aware shortly, that the APPG for Freedom of Religious Belief that I chair had their website hacked as well, and the text which questioned human rights violations by China, and it was removed. I reported that to Mr Speaker and made him aware of what had took place. It is clear that nothing whatsoever is secret to them, and the work of this House by the elected members of this House is not treated with respect. So will the Deputy Prime Minister commit to stop handling the Chinese oversteps, for want of a better description, with kids' gloves, and instead with authority, and help them to understand very clearly that they will not trample over democracy in this place or others without being held accountable to the very strictest terms?
Yes, we will certainly hold them to account in the way that the honourable gentleman describes. And in relation to the attack he describes, I will very happily make sure both parliamentary authorities and the National Cyber Security Centre are in touch with him about it.
So Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Deputy Speaker, we do know that the legacy systems, IT systems, are the most likely to be attacked in cyber. Has the Deputy Prime Minister, would he and has he ordered an inventory to be taken of all government IT equipment to see where particularly vulnerabilities lie?
Yes is the answer, and I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue. The first step is to properly understand where those vulnerabilities lie, and we've undertaken extensive work to ensure we know where risks lie, and we are putting in place measures to remediate those risks.
Chris Law.
This is too little and too late. It is reactive, not proactive. Two lowly officials get sanctioned when half the UK population's data and electoral roll gets cyber attacked. Just to give you a quick quote to remind you how serious this is, and I don't feel it's been taken seriously enough. Just in October last year, MI5 warned, and I quote, of epic scale of Chinese espionage, reporting more than 20,000 people in the UK having been covertly approached online by Chinese spies. And our own Commons Intelligence and Security Committee said China was, and I quote, prolifically and aggressively targeting the UK and had managed to successfully penetrate every sector of the UK's economy. So my question is very simple. How can any one of us and anyone outside of here, and including the entire society, trust this UK government when it's far too late and it does very little about what needs to be done?
I simply don't accept that characterisation. When it was this government that set up the National Cyber Security Centre, it's this government that set up the Ministerial Cyber Board, it's this government that's invested £2.6 billion into our cyber defences, and I have consistently warned about the cyber threats facing the United Kingdom time after time again, and we are taking steps to address those.
Bob Seeley.
Deputy Speaker, every time the Deputy Prime Minister comes here, and he's very eloquent in the plans that he lays out, he's more assertive, and we're doing this bit new and that bit new as we react to the threat. Isn't there an issue, though, that we still need to have a much greater sense of coherence across all government departments about how we deal with this threat, whether it's students, whether it's protection of Hong Kong citizens, whether it's intellectual property, or whether it's cyber attacks?
Well, I think my honourable friend raised an important point, and I pay tribute to the work that he's done in this space, and I've discussed it with him on many occasions. He is right that the UK government, in common with US government and others around the world, has evolved enormously in its approach to China. The sort of China that we had hoped for even a decade ago is not the China we have now, whether it's in relation to Hong Kong, whether it's in relation to Xinjiang or elsewhere. We are continuing to increase our efforts, and in the area that the honourable gentleman describes, that's precisely why we set up the Defending Democracy Task Force, which is being led by my right honourable friend, the Security Minister.
And Oswald.
Deputy Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister is right to address these issues and, as he said, to call it out. But I don't think calling it out really cuts the mustard here. There's certainly no appearance of urgency. And there's a worrying sense of nothing to see here in some of his responses. He did reference human rights. We know well the issues there, including the horrific forced labour and worse that the Uyghur population face. Then the action that he is outlining on all of these fronts is very underwhelming and actually a bit baffling in that regard. So I wonder, does the Deputy Prime Minister think that the large number of members all across this House today, who are obviously very much underwhelmed by his statement, are all wrong? Or does he think it's possible that the content of his statement is somehow missing the mark?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to remember that ultimately, and I want to reassure the House and the public, that these attempts were unsuccessful. I'm not being complacent, I'm setting out the facts in terms of the risk, whether it was at Cyber UK in Belfast last year, when I warned that cyber threats continue to come from the usual suspects, Russia, China, Iran or North Korea, whether it's in relation to Government Security Conference where I called out Russian state interference, whether it's in relation to creating secure by design, we have not hesitated to take action and we will continue to take action.
Speaker, democracy is not perfect, but the right to choose the people who make the laws that govern us is a really precious right, and it is really scary to hear that a foreign power might be trying to intervene on this. Mr Deputy Speaker, as one of the few women who's spoken in this statement, I want to remind you again how concerned I am about the threats and harassment that women get when standing for Parliament, especially as we get closer to election. As well as cybersecurity, I am very concerned about physical security. 2.5 years ago, my Essex neighbour was murdered at his constituency surgery. Last Friday, at my constituency surgery, the security operatives recommended by this Parliament failed to show up for the second time this year. So I am very grateful to the Deputy Prime Minister for recently putting extra money into security for both parliamentarians and candidates. But can you look again at the workings of this House and how our security is governed? Because that funding is not getting to those of us on the front line.
Well, I think my right honourable friend raises a concerning allegation which I will take up from the government side, working with House authorities. As she will be aware, we do take this threat exceptionally seriously, which is why we agreed an unprecedented increase in protective security for members of this House and other elected representatives. This is something we should all take very seriously, not least in the light of the two appalling murders of parliamentarians that I've seen in my time in this House.
Jim Barron. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When it comes to matters of national security like this, my temptation clearly is surely to work cross-party and to have a unified face on this. All the same, doesn't the Deputy Prime Minister understand that the relative weakness of the response to this terrible series of attacks, when combined then with his evasiveness over questions around the financial interests of the Foreign Secretary, are bound to increase people's concerns? It is understood that Lord Cameron still has close links to the Chinese state with numerous business ventures, and we also know, for example, that it was reported last week that the government has secretly softened its policy against Chinese businesses implicated in human rights abuses. So will he strengthen his response and demonstrate by his actions and by transparency that this soft peddling is nothing suspicious?
Well, the honourable gentleman stands up and says we should have a cross-party approach, then immediately seeks on political grounds to denigrate the Foreign Secretary and turn this into a party political matter. I'm afraid he has to choose one approach or the other.
Deputy Speaker. When we think ahead to the election, one of the points that's been raised today is about artificial intelligence and the threat to democracy. We often talk about the concept of deep fake news. It used to be fake news, but it's not just about deep fakes. There's the risk of rumour bombs happening to get people to not go to the polls on the day. It's about voice clones, where people may be phoned up to be told that they're pretending to be their daughter or their family member saying don't go and vote today. There are many risks that we may not even be aware of. And the data that we're talking about today may be used in conjunction with data from Facebook and from other places to pretend that they are something that they are not. So can I ask, along with the work that's going on within government and with tech companies, can we also look at an education campaign to let the public know that there are better ways to be aware of the risks that they may be under during the election? Thank you.
I think my honourable friend makes a really important point, because there will always be limitations at a time with rapidly evolving technology, particularly artificial intelligence, the ability of agencies or the companies themselves to be able to call this stuff out. There needs to be greater awareness from the public about the risks and the fact that they should treat these kind of images with a much higher degree of scepticism than they did previously, and it's something I will be taking up with my colleague, the Education Secretary.
Moynihan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Professor Jim Saker, who is the President of the Institute of Motor Industry, has warned about the threat that Chinese manufactured electric vehicles could pose, giving access to big data and personal information. He has gone on to say that Chinese connected EVs flooding the country could be the most effective Trojan horse that the Chinese establishment has to impact the UK. Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister what consideration he has given to the threat posed by Chinese manufactured EVs?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady raises a very important point. Clearly, any new technology or cars put on the UK market will have to meet with our safety standards, and it will include an assessment of those sort of threats. So what I would say is that we also work in conjunction with the National Security and Investment Act, under which I can make decisions to block or impose conditions on any investments or transactions from whichever state they come from, companies in whichever country they come from. So again, that's another tool in our weaponry which we didn't have previously.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend will no doubt be aware that the Electoral Commission failed an NCSC Cyber Essentials audit around the time that these breaches occurred. Among the failings identified were staff laptops and smartphones running outdated systems, and including Windows 10 Enterprise, which at the relevant time was no longer receiving security updates. Does my right honourable friend not agree that these failings look awfully like extraordinary negligence on the part of the Electoral Commission? And how satisfied is he that they have done everything necessary to regularise their procedures?
Well, I think the right honourable gentleman is right to highlight that, and it's precisely because of those concerns that we've ensured the Electoral Commission is working very closely with the National Cyber Security Centre to achieve a significant step up in their capabilities and their cyber resilience. It was essential that that work was undertaken, and it has been undertaken.
Alexander Stafford.
Very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. In May this year, we have local elections in Rotherham, like other places across the country. Now, the last local election in 2021, Labour kept control of Rotherham Council by only 54 electors. So what steps is the government putting in place to make sure when people go and cast their votes in May for the Conservatives in Rotherham, those votes are secure to end 50 years of Labour rule?
Well, I trust and hope that they will achieve that outcome. I would like to assure members that we have every confidence in the integrity of those elections and through the Defending Democracy Task Force, through my colleague, the Minister for Local Government, who has written out to all local authorities in the past week. We are ensuring that the integrity of those important elections is preserved.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement today and for responding to questions for over an hour. We're now moving on